Okay, it started recording. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you.
And good afternoon. I would like to join Emma in welcoming, our only guest to our session, to our speaker series. Today, talk is focused on groundwater. And we all know that reliable supply of clean water is essential to any community, any ecosystem, and any economy. Groundwater makes exceptionally an internal part of the water supply. In Ontario, 23% of the population, including majority of rural households and businesses, depend on groundwater for their water supply. In some areas, groundwater is only available source of water. Okay, I have this. Okay, accepted this. So, as I said, focus of our today's Lunch and Learn is groundwater. And groundwater, as any other topic in environmental science, it's a big, huge, complex topic. And today, with this session being only like 15 to 20 minutes, I will just scratch the surface. I don't think I will answer all questions that are possible with regards to groundwater. So feel free to contact me after the session anytime. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation on the very last slide, and also can be found on our website. In today's presentation, I will explain where groundwater comes from, how it is replenished, how it moves in the subsurface, and why some surface materials are a better source of water than others. I will explore some groundwater terminology and concepts such as aquifer, aquitard, porosity, formation, permeability, other stuff that we don't use every day. We will talk about protecting our groundwater and groundwater monitoring within the Kawartha Conservation Watershed. Of course, I will start with my introductory slide to the Kawartha Conservation Watershed and to Kawartha Conservation itself. So we are the watershed-based non-profit organization established in 1979 by the municipalities within the watershed jurisdiction under the Conservation Authorities Act. Kawartha Conservation is one of the 36 conservation authorities that operate in Ontario, and we are a member of Conservation Ontario. And I would like to note that conservation authorities are very unique to Ontario. Only they exist only within Ontario, like out of the all Canada. Balancing environmental capacity and human needs, we manage natural resources features that are essential for sustaining water quality and quantity through watershed planning, stewardship, environmental monitoring and research, and management of conservation and natural areas. So the Kawartha Conservation Watershed stretches, covers a little bit more than 2,500 square kilometers with population more or less about 70,000 people. We have 6 member municipalities. Over 20 major creeks and rivers are located within our watershed, and their length is totaling over 2,400 kilometers. The largest watercourse within our watershed is Mariposa Brook at 294 square kilometers, and the smallest is Cockress Creek at 16 square kilometers. Oh no, it's a length of the water courses. Sorry. 294 for Mariposa, and 16 for Cockers Creek. We have 6 large lakes within our watershed with a total area of 262 square kilometers of their surfaces. And coming closer to today's topic, there are 15 groundwater municipal water supply system within the Kawartha Conservation Watershed and 13 groundwater monitoring wells within our jurisdiction. So all water on our planet is continually moving and even changes its form in the process, from vapor to liquid, from liquid to solid, and then back to liquid or vapor. This constant and endless journey is called the hydrological or water cycle. The water cycle is powered by energy from the sun. It is a continuous exchange of moisture between the oceans or large water bodies, the atmosphere, and the land. So as its cycle, it's not possible to find a starting point in this process, so I'm just taking a liberty and starting with the precipitation. Rain or melted snow at the soil surface can take several routes. It can run off over the land directly into the surface bodies, such as streams or lakes. It can seep or infiltrate into the ground to be used directly by plants or to recharge groundwater. It can evaporate from the ground or surface water bodies, or be released by plants by the process that is called transpiration to return to the atmosphere as the small water vapor particles. Floating in the air, those water particles will get together, form clouds that will produce rain or snow. So this cycle is complete. And at some moment of time, water goes underground, under the ground surface. A process of water seeping under the surface of the earth is called infiltration. But where does it go in the ground? Water may get absorbed by the soil and may stay in the soil for a long time until it gradually gets evaporated. Some of infiltrated water can get absorbed by plant roots and later transpired by plants. Infiltration occurs in the upper layers of the ground, but may also continue further downward into the water table to replenish water tables and aquifers. Process of moving of water into rocks through cracks and pore spaces is called percolation. The rate of infiltration and percolation depends on factors such as amount of precipitation, type of soils, amount of vegetable cover over the area, pre-saturation levels, and the topography of the land, as well as the levels of evapotranspiration in the region. Once water gets below the ground, it becomes groundwater. So it's water in the ground, groundwater. A definition of groundwater is as following. Groundwater is water that seeps into the ground and passes through subsurface materials such as soil, sediments, and bedrock. Eventually, all groundwater reaches a spring, stream, lake, or wetland where it discharges to the surface, becoming surface water. This may take as little as a few days or as much as centuries, depending on the substrate and depending on the characteristics of material that is called porosity. So we know that materials below the surface are different. Bedrock, such as granite, shale, sandstone, limestone. In our areas, bedrock is covered with soil and deposits of sediments, including clay, silt, sand, gravel. A layer that consists of similar geological material is called a formation, geological formation. So under the ground, water is moving through openings between the pieces of soil or rock that is called pores. Those openings can be smaller or larger. The percentage of total volume of empty spaces, pores, in bedrock or sediments is called porosity. The greater the porosity is, the greater the volume of water that can be stored in those pores. Different geological formations have different degrees of porosity. For example, gravel and sand, like large sand formations, can have a porosity percentage as high as 25-50%, while the dense solid bedrock may have less than 1% of porosity. The rate, slow to fast, and amount of water that can move through the formation depends on its porosity and on how well the pores are connected. A large amount of water moves rapidly through the formation with many large connected pores, such as gravel or highly fractured bedrock. Water moves slowly through formation with small, poorly connected pores, for example, clayish materials. Formation that allow large amounts of water to flow rapidly, such as sand and gravel deposits or sandstone, are called highly permeable. In contrast, clay, silt, and granite formations are much less permeable. Near the ground surface, pores usually contain a mixture of air and water. In groundwater, like science terms, they are considered unsaturated. At greater depths, the pores become full of water and they become completely saturated. The water table is defined as the level in ground above which pores are saturated and below which pores, the other way, level that, sorry about that, never happened before. Above which pores are unsaturated and below pores are saturated. Infiltration and percolation. Infiltration is the process by which precipitation or water soaks into the substrate. Okay. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. So water moves underground and in some point reaches the layer that has lots of pores that are already filled with water. Such a layer is called an aquifer. An aquifer will yield useful and sustainable amount of water when pumped. The most productive aquifers, such as sands and gravels, are typically thick and large in area and are replenished or recharged by infiltrating rainwater. An example of exceptionally good aquifer in Ontario and within our watershed, at the very south portion of our watershed, is the aquifer within the Oak Ridge Marine Formation, Oak Ridge Marine feature. It's thick deposit of sand and gravel that was left behind by the glacial 11,000 years ago, provides drinking water to millions of Ontarians. Other formations called aquatarts or confining layers are made up of materials with low permeability, such as layers of clay and shale, which prevent any significant movements of water. Aquatarts sometimes separate aquifers from each other. Aquatarts play a very important role in preventing spread of contamination. Water in the ground types of aquifers again. So there are three main types of aquifers. Aquifers could be unconfined or water table aquifers, where the top of the aquifer is also the water table. It's the water-bearing formation layer that is closest to the ground surface. Confined aquifers, those where permeable formation is located below an aquitard or confined between two aquatards, at least two. And there are also semi-confined aquifers that sometimes are called leaky. They are similar to confined aquifers, except that the aquatards next to it are more permeable and let significant amount of water move through them to the aquifer. So as I mentioned, unconfined aquifers are often the shallowest and most easily prone to the contamination. Confined and semi-confined aquifers are often found at greater depths. The greater the depths and thickness of material overlaying semi-confined and confined aquifer, the less those aquifers are susceptible to contamination, the safer they are. So this slides shows examples of different aquifers. For the unconfined sand aquifer, that's what we have here. The water table is also the top of the aquifer, the water table here. The confined gravel aquifer occurs where the permeable formation is confined aquifer, and a little bit, well, here, confined aquifer. And is located below the clay aquatards and above the shale bedrock aquatard as shown. If a confined aquifer follows a downward grade from a recharge zone, groundwater can become pressurized as it flows. That can create artesian wells that flow freely without the need of the pump. Oh, we have a little bit of artesian well here on our right side of the slide. How groundwater flows. Groundwater is always on the move. That's no question here. But contrary to the popular belief, the groundwater does not flow in underground rivers or form underground lakes. In general, groundwater moves from areas of recharge toward areas of discharge, such as springs, streams, lakes, or wetlands. Water infiltrating or recharging in the hills or uplands of a river valley travels down to the water table aquifer and moves horizontally and finally discharges into the surface water body. The exact path that water flows along can be very complex, but most of the water will take the path of least resistance, flowing through the most permeable formations. Some water can also flow downward through unconfined aquifers to recharge the deeper confined aquifers. It does happen. And eventually, within those deeper confined aquifers, it will flow to the location that can be far away, kilometers or 10 kilometers away from the location where it recharges. With regard to the speed of velocity of the flow, groundwater can flow a few centimeters to a few meters a day in sand or gravel aquifers, or tens of meters a day in some highly fractured bedrock aquifers, while in some aquatards, the water may move less than a few millimeters a day, and sometimes it will take centuries for water to get in confined aquifers or aquatards to get discharged. I already mentioned the term recharge areas a few times. Recharge area is another important feature in the overall groundwater science. So recharge area are areas where geological settings such as soil composition allow for infiltrating of increased amount of water, sometimes significantly more than surrounding areas. Again, Oak Ridge Moraine, small area, but extremely important recharge area where the sand and gravel deposits allow precipitation to be infiltrated rapidly and replenish the groundwater at a higher rates. So, like as we see, sometimes those areas are concentrated, covering a small part of the total land area, as we see with Oak Ridge. In other places with a flat landscape or low permeability soils, such as clays and silts, a small amount of infiltration may take place over a large area. The example of those areas within our watershed is the middle portion of our watershed, areas around Lindsay, Mariposa Brook subwatershed, Emily Creek subwatershed. It's an area where lots of clay and very fine sand deposits are found. So recharge rates within those areas are very slow. So it is why it is very important to identify and protect areas of the significant recharge. So now I will talk a little bit about the effect of the pumping of groundwater, what happens when we pump. In an unpumped aquifer, water infiltrating the subsurface seeps down the water table down here and then moves horizontally toward the discharge, such as stream, lake, or swamp, wetland. When a well is pumped in unconfined aquifer, water is removed from the aquifer and water table in that aquifer is lowered. So we have water table in the shape of a cone. This lowering or drawdown of the water table is greatest close to the well and gets smaller in all directions as the distance from the well increases. This pattern of drawdown in the aquifer is referred to as the cone of depression or the drawdown cone. The size and shape of the cone of depression will grow and shrink at the rate and duration of well pumping changing. Pumping and the cone of depression, it creates causes water moving abnormally. Well, I mean, not typically as in normal untouched aquifer. So water that would normally flow past a well on its way through the aquifer to the streams, the part of water cycle, will be captured by pumping well and brought above ground for use. Pumping can create groundwater divides, like here, where water is split, where water direction is split in different areas that are not necessarily normal or natural. The groundwater removed from the aquifer may eventually be replaced by rain and snow melt that seeps into the ground and aquifer. However, the amounts of water that is replacing the aquifer amounts may not exactly balance or recharge at the same time as rate of the withdrawals. and the amount of water stored in aquifer may change. Aquifer may deplete. As a result, a lack of groundwater and groundwater pumping will affect not only the water supplies, but also the lakes, rivers, wetlands that depend on the groundwater contribution. So, as water levels in the aquifer and the well can drop to the point that water cannot be pumped, it is important to remember that we have to protect and manage the quantity of the groundwater supply. We all know that groundwater is a vital resource for humanity overall. In some regions, groundwater is the only source of water available. Even if Ontario, where surface water is plenty, as I mentioned, 23% of population depends on groundwater only for the domestic, farm, and business water supply. Within Kawartha Conservation Watershed, as I mentioned again, there are 15 municipal water supply systems that get their water from groundwater. Those systems supply water to about 15,000 of residents within our watershed. Another about 30,000 of residents rely on groundwater as water source by using their own private wells. So overall, when we look at numbers, almost 63% of the population within the Kawartha Conservation Watershed depends on groundwater for their water supply. So that's why it is very important that we all protect and safeguard our water supply, our groundwater as source of water supply for so many people, and we want to protect it quantity and quality. To ensure an ongoing supply of groundwater, if you are private well owner, consider the following actions. Reducing water use and considering water storage. For some reason the piece of a sentence is missing. Reducing the size, considering the water holding tank. Reducing the size of the pump and possibly adding storage to reduce the drawdown during pumping. Increasing storage by installing a larger pressure tank. Cleaning or rehabilitating the well to improve its performance. And conserving water. Conserving water is a big, not for private well owners, but for all people. Water is not the endless supply, and we all have to think of using less water. Speaking of the quality of the groundwater, it is very important to protect the quality because once contaminated, it is very hard, next to impossible, to remediate, to clean the groundwater aquifer, the water aquifer. There are potential contamination sources associated with human activities that may affect the groundwater quality. These can be point sources where potential contaminants are concentrated or stored in one spot, such as fuel storage tank. And also there are non-point sources where potential contaminants are spread over a wider area, such as applied nutrients on agricultural fields. The vulnerability of groundwater to contamination varies across the landscape. The vulnerability of each aquifer is unique, and determining factors include the type of the formation, its aquifer depths, and whether it is protected by a low permeability aquithards. A shallow, unconfined aquifer is usually more vulnerable to potential contamination. I already mentioned that, comparing to the deep, confined aquifer. Water may have to pass through an aquatar to reach a deep confined aquifer to improving its condition and to lessening the chance of contamination. What we can do to improve our water safety, groundwater safety, we have to dispose the chemicals property, we have to dispose the motor oil properly, limit the amount of fertilizer used in our households and on our fields, maintaining our septic tanks, who does have it, and properly abandon all unused well on the property, on your property, because the unused well, it's a direct connection from the upground world into the aquifer. And as my last slide of this presentation, I would like to talk a little bit about the groundwater monitoring within the Kawartha Conservation Watershed. That we monitor groundwater in 13 groundwater monitoring wells as a part of the provincial groundwater monitoring network. Objective of this program is to monitor ambient aquifers, ambient aquifer conditions. Overall, there are more than 450 wells in southern Ontario in the provincial groundwater monitoring network. And I already mentioned we have 13. We measure hourly water level on, constantly measure. We have data loggers measuring hourly water levels, recording and sending it remotely sometimes. Sometimes we'll have to go and download data in some locations. We do water quality sampling once a year. And the very first time when a well is brought to the provincial groundwater monitoring network, we do sample it for very wide array of parameters, like literally you name it, we sample it. After that, the priority parameters are identified and sampled on the routine basis. And some wells within our watershed been in monitoring for about 20 years now. And just a fun fact, the deepest well within our jurisdiction is 170 meters and it's located near Pontypool, of course, within the Oak Ridge Marine Formation. And actually, it's the deepest well within the monitoring network, the provincial monitoring network. And the shallowest well within our jurisdiction is about 6.4 meters, that located in Oakwood in limestone formation. And data on water levels and water quality are available online. Here is the link, or if you just you can contact me and I will provide this link to you. And with this, I'm taking way more than 15 minutes. Sorry about that. Here is my contact information. Should you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me and I will try my best to answer your questions.
Thanks very much, Irina. There's an awful lot of information there. And I guess I just had a couple of questions to ask. So in terms of sampling, do we ever sample private wells, or is it just the provincial wells that we sample?
Yeah. As a part of our groundwater monitoring program, we sample only wells that are part of that network. We do have a capacity for sampling, but we just don't do the private well sampling.
That's great, thank you. And if somebody was interested in finding out what aquifer their private well was on, is there a way of finding that out? Is there any information available online?
You know what? The best source for local groundwater information is a local well driller. There is information online, but still, even Ministry of Environment Conservation and Parks that are responsible for groundwater monitoring, there would be the first direction: talk to your local driller. If you still have questions or have more questions, come back to us and we will work with that. But local drillers, honestly, are the best source of information.
That's great, thank you. And I'm just, I'm personally on a private well, and so I'm just thinking of all those other people who are in a similar position. If they had a concern with the water quality within their well, how would they go about getting that tested, or what would they do in that situation?
You can always contact the Ministry of Environmental Conservation and Parks. There is, it's called Well Help Desk. Also, you can test your water. I believe it's free of charge for bacterial contamination with the public health unit. They will provide you with containers and instructions how to do that. However, that would be for bacterial E. coli. However, if you really want to do, comprehensive testing, that would be something that well owner will have to take on by themselves, himself, herself.
Sure. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Irene. We've come to the end of our Lunch and Learn today. I think I know I've learned a lot through that presentation, so I appreciate that. So for anyone who's interested, we do have another Lunch and Learn coming up in November, on November the 17th, which is on our Geographical Information Systems, which is our mapping online system. And so Nancy Aspden will be presenting that one. So we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you very much. I'm going to end the recording and we'll close the session today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Emma.